to receive. Whatever message is here for us, it is here right now, and it is received perfectly. And I bless Reverend Patrick right now, knowing that as he has prepared this information, that everything comes through him in this most perfect way, bringing that circle of giving and receiving together in a beautiful divine essence and a beautiful manifestation of information going back and forth and expansion happening. So I'm grateful for the work of Brene Brown. I'm grateful for Patrick tonight and for all of us that have come together to celebrate this and to learn a little bit more about ourselves and everything in our lives. I know that this is, that it assists us and uniquely, each of us, in the most perfect way. So knowing all these things, I am grateful in advance for the fulfillment of this and the manifestation and the demonstration. As I take this word I have spoken and I release it, I let it go as law, and I know that it is complete as we affirm together. And so it is.
Yes, oh, hello. Brene. What can I say? We've been talking about her for a long time. That's what Adara was just saying. She wanted to come find out what this thing, this beautiful person that Patrick respects so much. And it's interesting because I have other male role models as well, but she's someone who I've really, really touched me when I saw her for the first time. And I like to call her the vulnerability and shame queen, and she is the funniest. Just my personal stuff with her is that she is very funny, and I like funny, but it's very authentic. And she's a Texas gal that you're going to get to know. So, her mantra is lock and load. And so Rita gave me a 6-pack. Oh no! No, of Brene Brown tapes, CDs. A 6-pack, and I have been listening to her in the car for probably about a year, and so I'm on my third and fourth round of the 6 CDs, because you just, it's like with anything, you just get to, it means something different, as you know. It's like science of mind or anything that you look at it again, you go, wow, and you're thinking, well, I know that 10 years ago. So, hey, Ruth. So I thought what would be a wonderful idea, since Brene Brown is still alive. I got to know her when she did her first TED Talk that went viral, and millions of people, I think, as we, it'll be the next one, just a second. But her quote here that I started us out with is, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. And this is her entire thing, and we'll get more of that. But what I wanted to do tonight is Brene Brown, she's 53, if my adding's right, probably 52 or 53. She's a Texas gal. The 2010 TEDx talk forever changed the course of her career. So this is what happened. She's a researcher, and she just happens to do this TED Talk that goes viral. And we all know what happens when then everybody gets to know you. So it was followed by her 2012 book, Daring Greatly, partially about her resulting vulnerability hangover, which I love. Does anybody know what a vulnerability hangover is? Somebody tell me what a vulnerability hangover is.
Ouch.
Ouch. She said ouch.
Oh, ouch. That's
Ouch.
it. Okay.
What's a vulnerability hangover?
You're vulnerable in the moment, and then after the fact, you have kind of a, oh my gosh, what did I do? Should I really have done that?
Exactly. Ouch. And it was so much like kind of an, if you've ever drank and had a hangover, I know probably no one in this room has ever experienced that, but if you had experienced that, the reason that it's called a hangover is because you're still experiencing the night before, physically, mentally, emotionally. And so what's happening is that's why it's called a vulnerability, right? Just exactly what you say. I mean, I have it sometimes. I talk about on Sundays. I get a little too transparent, or I really open up, and then I get in the car, and you're like, oh, it's kind of like, did I undress in front of the entire congregation? And that's what it's really about for her, is getting past that and getting through that is better. hangover and the downsides and opportunities of her instant celebrity. And that's what we're going to work a little bit tonight. She wasn't always a celebrity, but you'll see how one thing can change your entire life. One moment, forget about even a TED Talk, just one moment in our lives, we all know that, can change everything. And so the related TED Talk she gave that year now has had more than 9 million views. And this was probably 3 or 4 years ago. So you can imagine, and she's done many since then. So I thought it'd be a fabulous idea to watch the TED Talk that started her career. And the first time I saw her, and was able to follow her and my relationship with her. So we're going to show the original TED Talk that started. Yeah, we had it like that, but look what happened. So we're going to actually go to YouTube and actually. So anyway, while my wonderful Rita is doing that, so what we're going to do tonight, what I want to do with us tonight is just watch the progression of only like a very short time. When you're thinking, what was it, 2010? And now, let's do it. Lights.
I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And it's like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet-talking me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was getting my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more of the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. Yes. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. Like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what? This is the career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's why we're here. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss, and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome, and one thing that you kind of have an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you the most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling, I'm not blank enough, I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in, I'm going to figure this stuff out, I'm going to spend a year, I'm going to totally deconstruct shame, I'm going to understand how vulnerability works, and I'm going to outsmart it. So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well. You know this. So I can tell you all about shame, but I have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data. And 6 years, and I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is, this is how it works. I wrote a book, I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. Wow. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection, was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie. And I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder. And I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. Mm-hmm. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. Mm-hmm. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard it earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research. Where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. A little breakdown. Right. Which actually looked more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown, my therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends are like, ooh, I want to be your therapist. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm just saying, don't bring your measuring stick. Okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down, and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great, I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, it's a vulnerability issue. And, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness, but it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love, and I think I have a problem, and I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing, no family stuff, no child shit, I just need some strategies. So she goes like this. And then I said, bad, right? She She said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is going to suck. And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest. Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny, I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down. Asking someone out. Waiting for the doctor to call back, getting laid off, laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence, and it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history. The problem is, and I learned this from the research, that you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's... You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness. And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning. And then we feel vulnerable, so then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. And it becomes this dangerous cycle. One of the things that I think that we need to think about is why and how we numb. And it doesn't just have to be addiction. The other thing we do is we make everything that's uncertain certain. Religion has gone from belief and faith and mystery to certainty. I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. That's it. Just certain. The more afraid we are, the more vulnerable we are, the more afraid we are. This is what politics looks like today. There's no discourse anymore. There's no conversation. There's just blame. You know how blame is described in research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort. We perfect. If there's anyone who wants their life to look like this, it would be me. But it doesn't work. Because what we do is we take fat from our butts and put it in our cheeks. Which just, I hope in 100 years people will look back and go, wow. And we perfect, most dangerously, our children. Let me tell you what we think about children. They're hardwired for struggle when they get here. When you hold those perfect little babies in your hand, our job is not to say, look at her, she's perfect. My job is just to keep her perfect, make sure she makes the tennis team by 5th grade and Yale by 7th grade. That's not our job. Our job is to look and say, you know what? You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. That's our job. Show me a generation of kids raised like that and we'll end the problems I think we see today. We pretend that what we do doesn't have an effect on people. We do that in our personal lives. We do that corporate, whether it's a bailout, an oil spill, a recall. We pretend like what we're doing doesn't have a huge impact on other people. I would say to companies, this is not our first rodeo, people. We just need you to be authentic and real and say, we're sorry, we'll fix it. But there's another way, and I'll leave you with this. This is what I found. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful. Because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
Can you grab those lights? So that's my Brene Brown. And as I was sitting there watching that and just being a part of, this again, seeing it for the first time, I've thought like this my entire life since I was really little. And when I heard her, it was as though it was kind of like when I went to this teaching to hear the validation of what I had been feeling all along anyway about things like shame and fear and on vulnerability. One thing before we get into just a bit of her life, I want to ask you, we love doing these things because we like to tie them into what we do here, and which is clear to me. But I would just like some feedback from some people. How do you think this type of thinking, this type of behaving, first of all, did you like her? I mean, she's really funny. I mean, it's funny in a way that now you see why she brought in millions of people, because they could understand what she was talking about. Yeah, what? Connect with her, exactly. One little thing before I ask this question is the moment that she did this, her whole life went very celebrity and viral, and she became, she said that everybody was asking her to speak, and so you went from a researcher to, oh my God, this is really cool, let's do a TED Talk, to the phones are ringing, the thing, and one of the stories, I'm not sure it's in my stuff, but in my material with it, but I remember her talking about the first time it was happening, everybody started responding, and she was given some really valuable advice. She said, please, they said, please, do not read the comments this early in your career with this type of career. She already had a career. She obviously had been a researcher. And she said, and her husband said, please, do not read anything on social media. And she said, so I said, I won't. And then he left, and she goes, I ran to the computer. And she said, and I read it, and it was, she had to separate herself. She had another little breakdown. Because she said the thing that hurt her the most about it was that nobody was talking about her work. They were talking about her ass and her jeans. And that, does she know what she's wearing when she's up there? And all of these things that just totally, so she gets into it later in her career. She's like, you hire somebody, they go through all of the stuff, and they pull out the things that are going to benefit you. And so I can absolutely see. So she's also working with that vulnerability. The other part of it is she did a shame, what she calls the shame talk, just like this, years later too, and it didn't do as well. And so her research showed her, why do you think, okay, this went viral, and then let's take another one. She did it on shame. Why do you think, and it was liked, but why do you think that it didn't go as big as the first one?
Because she was so clearly a normal human person being completely herself in the first one. She wasn't packaged at all.
Right. And she remained that way. Why do you think, just in social media world, why do you think social media, why that didn't go further just in numbers?
Nobody wants to uncover shame.
And I think it was mostly because they had already, in their mind, well, I already know that. You've already talked about that, so I don't need to listen to that again. Then you come with something new.
Right. Well, here's another one. Mostly what Adara was talking about, and this is what Stephanie had just said. Star had just said this. Because she said when she researched it and asked why, everyone said, we love this. I've watched it too. You guys will love it too when you watch it. Her shame was so valuable, but nobody would share it. Nobody shared it. It's like they did share it, but the reason this went viral is because everybody was sharing it and it went crazy. But in shame, this is their response to her. Oh my God, you hit home with the shame, but I can't forward this on to share this to my friends because they're gonna, because what happens when I talked to Charles about this because he loves social media. I said, how do you go viral? How do you do this? And he said, it's because of sharing. And if I send Michelle, I've got this great thing on shame, then Michelle's going, well, that's interesting that Patrick chose me to send the video of shame. And so that's why they don't, because it's just like if you say, I found this greatest weight loss program, and then you send it to somebody, they go, are they saying I'm fat? I mean, why are they doing? So she said it was amazing that they liked it, but they said I felt awkward sharing it because it was vulnerable. So my question, so how do you think her work, which we're going to see even more of it, but just in this one time, how do you think this ties into like this work I do with my inner child work, all of this stuff, right? I mean, it's like the heart of what I do in that work with. But how do you think it ties into spirituality, science of mind and spirit, or just spirituality in general?
Well, you have to be wholehearted with science of mind. It's all about being wholehearted, knowing you're worthy and believing what you say and that you're worth receiving what you're claiming.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and I would share, when I've delved into what's going on, really it always goes down to some thread of, I don't feel like I'm enough.
Right.
I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like I'm worthy. And even working with others through practitioner, like we could really boil it down to just a few things and that belief about ourselves.
Right.
And that belief inside is how we create our lives.
Right.
And that's why with the teaching, when we change what we believe about ourselves, our lives change.
Right. And I was telling Rita that I went to the Science of Mind text and I looked up vulnerability. I went to the concordance to look up vulnerability and shame because I wanted to see what Ernest Holmes had to say about it. There was no reference to it, not even one. And that didn't mean that he wasn't dealing with shame and vulnerability. It meant that if you went over to fear, there was endless cycles of and information on fear. So we've moved up a lot in those days. So now we're realizing that if we can break the shame spiral, if we can be vulnerable and open, that spirituality that we are will be freed. So they say, well, is it very important to go back and pull up your past? We're really not doing that. We're going back to pull up the feelings that were created with that past, with those stories. And that's why I think her work is so important. Anyone else that...
I was just thinking about numbing. And if you numb part of yourself, you're numbing all of yourself. So how can you be fully expressed if you got the numb thing going on?
I loved it. I mean, didn't she cover a lot in like 20 minutes? I mean, that's a lot. That's why I went, wow. Go ahead.
When I
A little bit more rock stars.
when I feel into it,
Yeah.
what I see is that the vulnerability or the shame is because we feel that we're separate, that we're separate from everything that created us, and so there's no value because it's just this separate, nothing, that has no capacity. So the vulnerability comes in because in order to get through that, you have to get into the, seeing really what's behind it. What is it that makes that feeling? And that's the path to find who I really am.
Exactly, and I'll give you an example that ties right in with her work too. I was speaking to somebody about reaching into our inner child and going back, and there's a child we went on, and the child was left behind. And so what happened was, I said, and they go, yeah, well, I'm going back, I'm going to bring my child. And I said, well, this is what's going to happen, because I believe that the inner child is the pure energy of spirit that has never been touched by anything. That's what we may call it, the little child, and visualize and do that, and that's perfect. I do that. But I said, here's what we're going to find happens. We go back to that little pure inner child, and we're sitting there thinking, come on, Dad's here, man. I'm going to take you back, little girl, little boy. But what really happens, makes me emotional, is that little energy, that little boy, that little girl, part of ourselves, takes our hand and leads us out. So this new discovery that I discovered within this work that I continue to do in the spiritual realm is that all this time I thought we were going in to be the saviors. And all we were doing was going in long enough to open up to the vulnerability, to allow that child to now take us back. So very interesting, so let's just find out some fun stuff about her. Cassandra Brene Brown, oldest of 4 kids, who grew up moving from San Antonio to New Orleans. They were she had her wild days of bartending and she actually, let me just tell you, because these are just words, but she got sober for a different reason. She didn't get sober because she was falling out she just got sober because she realized that she was numbing before she even had to do. She didn't have to fall, or what do they call it? Anybody, hit bottom. She didn't do that, but she knew that she would. But she said she realized, and she said the real way she got off of alcohol, she quit smoking. Because she said, I ain't doing one without the other one. I ain't going to smoke, and I've smoked, so I know exactly what that's like. There's no way that I'm going to have a cigarette without having a beer or something else. But she did it in a different way, and finally finishing her bachelor's degree, she actually, on her day of graduating, I believe it was, she just stopped and said, I can't do this anymore. And she considers herself sober. She's been to meetings, but she considers herself sober, but not the same, because she said, I had to keep going from meeting to find out where I belonged. Because she wasn't going necessarily for the alcohol. She didn't do drugs, but she was going in there because she was numbing, and she knew from her research and her life that this is why she was doing it. She said, I would never go to a party. She said, look at it. We go to a party, we have a few drinks, and I'm able to socialize. She said, there's not a way. She said, when she stands up in front of people, that's her world. But if you put her in a little party with 5 or 6 people, she said, I'll be under the chair in a fetal position. Because I don't like that intimacy of that. I'd rather be home with my kids. So she's just married this wonderful man, Steve Alley, whom she met when they were both lifeguards and their life and raising her 2 kids. Her kids must be about 18 and 19 now, and the other one about 5 years younger. But they have he's a pediatrician. The reason I know all this because I know the tapes that I know all of the stuff that's not in any of this stuff. But so Brene Brown, obviously she has a wonderful career as a research professor at the University of Houston. in her social work. And she also is the author of many books. I love this one. I Thought It Was Just Me. I thought it was just me. And she said this is what really moved her in her work. But what I love the most about her is that she hated vulnerability. And she said, I was a social worker and got out of it because it was too vulnerable. So when she went to I remember her first class, the professor said, whatever bullshit these people are telling you, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And she said, now, and that's what she thought her whole life was going to be about, why she had the breakdown, obviously. Numerous teaching awards. The stuff is kind of interesting, but not really, because we know she's good enough to have all these. I am imperfect. This is an interesting statement for me personally, because I come from a teaching that basically says we started perfect, and we're always perfect. But I get in her work how she's dealing with imperfection, because I may know that, just like, what did they say in the hierarchy, the self-actualization? My first day at 50 years old, when I went back to school, self-actualization, and they were talking, and there was kids that are 20, 25 years old next to me, and here's this guy sitting in the middle, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, wow, that's a long road to self-actualization. And then the professor said, does anybody have any viewpoints of this? And I said, yeah, I do. I actually believe we come here self-actualized. And then we spend our entire time here remembering that. And then this was her reaction. That's very interesting, Patrick. Anyone else? And then all the kids are all like running, the kids, what does that mean? Do you think we're really perfect? Like I said, yeah, I actually do. So that's why I brought it up, because she says everyone's imperfect, but you are enough just the way you are. I totally get it from the psychology level. I totally get that. So here's her books: The Gift of Imperfection, Letting Go of Who We Think We Should Be, and Embracing Who We Are. Daring Greatly, we're going to go into a little bit of that tonight. How the Courage to Be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live. Love, Parent, and Lead, Rising Strong. The Reckoning, The Rumble, The Revolution. She's got a list and so many, God, so much work is out there. But she says, too, that she hates writing. She has a lot of books. The reason she hates writing is that's her most vulnerable. She can get up and talk about it, but she said she can't be everywhere. So she writes books so you can be a part of her, and does workshops on tapes. But her real thing is speaking and being it, because she said when she's actually writing, her gremlins come out. She calls all of her stuff gremlins. So what she does is when she's struggling, she'll say, "What's your gremlin?" From the movie. Yeah. So the gremlins, she'll say, "What's your gremlins?" And the thing about the gremlins, remember that? They couldn't handle the light. Water and light. Yes, exactly. So there's her, and then some of her more. Bruce. Okay, this is what's really cool. Can you imagine? This is about 5 years ago. This is her $25,000 to $50,000 in speaking fees. She said when she first started out, she never said no. She was gone all the time. She said, I said no. And she said, why I didn't say no? She says, I thought if I said no, they would never ask again. So she has all through her career exposed herself so that we can see even the work that she has to do on herself. But I think she's up to like 75. That's a lot for a couple hours, don't you think? Look at me, we do it for an hour, and I ain't getting no $75,000. Yet. Woo! The award of and her teaching. Oh, and then she's also she did, of course, her PBS and NPR and all of the stuff and the beautiful work that Rita bought me for my birthday a year ago, and continues to do the TED Talks. Oh, that's the thing too. When she'll go to a company. And a lot of people hire her, the big CEOs, and they hire her. And it's really funny because they go, we're having some problem with our innovation. And so we love your TED Talk. And what do you want me to talk about? Oh, I don't care. Just if you could just leave out the vulnerability and shame when you come. And she's thinking, I don't know how to talk about anything like that. So her first gig was, she lives in Texas, so I'll just tell you a couple of those country clubs there. So she goes into the woman and she says, I'm here to speak. And she goes, what are you going to talk about? And she goes, oh, let me see your bio. And she said it was one of those Texans that her hair is pulled so back. And she goes, and so she's reading her thing and she's going, oh my God. And she's looking and she goes, it says here that you research shame, And she said, yeah, that's what I do. She goes, well, first of all, you don't even look like a researcher. And she's sitting there thinking, okay, I guess I should have worn a white coat and this would have helped me out a little bit. And she says, so what are you going to talk about? And she says, okay, forget it. And this woman's like, oh, forget it. What do you actually, besides shame, what do you research? And she said, now I know this is going to go all the way down. She says, vulnerability and fear. And she said, no, we don't do that. I don't know how this happened, but you have 350 women that are going to be out there. They want how-to. They want this, they want that. They want to know how to be beautiful. They want to know how to be successful. And they want steps. So you're not going to talk about any of that stuff. She goes, besides, they'll be eating. And she said that was the first time she realized that her work made people throw up. And I just went, what? So she said the difference between her then, and she said she cried for 3 hours all the way home. And she gave the talk, but she said this is what she gave. It is really good to love yourself. Loving yourself is probably one of the best ways in order to, and she said for an hour, she just kept trying to say anything she could without that. She said the difference between her then and now, she said, I cried because I gave up me. I cried. Have we ever been there? That you gave up, she said, because I'll tell you one thing. I was probably, I think she was 40 at that time. She said, that wouldn't even fly with me now. I would have said, excuse me, and I would have beelined for the door, and you would never have me stand up. I would never, and it was one of the biggest lessons of vulnerability that she had. Look at this one. As active on social media like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, she has more than 1.3 million followers on Facebook. I didn't even know they let you have that many. Rita said it's when you're a celebrity, huh? The followers, friends. Oh. Besides this, she has 87,000 followers on Instagram and 480,000 followers on Twitter. That's a lot. Yeah. And these stats were probably old. Then we all know what happened. So then in 2013, Brown gained the only fan who matters in the book industry, and that is Oprah. An invitation for Brown to appear on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, and featured her and this whole little class that she did, and she's never had to look back on that. But go ahead.
Was that her Daring Greatly book?
Yeah. And here's the other thing. She said, this is what I see for all of us. I love relating that to all of us, what's going on with her. She didn't say, because in manifestation, even if you're retreating, she wasn't saying, I just know that I'm going to be on Oprah and do all of this. She did what she did and what she was good at, her passion, her love. And this is what happened because of that. I'm not saying that you cannot, I know people that have visualized themselves, in a certain thing and it happens. But she just did what we all needed to hear. And because of that, Oprah heard her, and because we all know that Oprah gets it, and then it's over.
You get a book, and
Right. Dr. Phil, remember Dr. Phil? Is he still on, by the way? Dr. Oz. Yeah. So anyway, I saw this one too. Did anybody see Super Soul with her? Yeah, it's great. Okay, a couple things. This is what happened. I'm not going to go into all of the words. I just wanted her to remind me. She started her own businesses after this. So one of it is she recruited a couple of friends so she could strike out on her own and figure out how to turn her cult of personality into a sustainable business. That was what she wanted to make sure, because it was turning very culty for her. We can imagine. They were wanting the answers and the thing. And she said, I've got to turn this into a business that people can actually like buy the books, do the work yourself. And so she did. Now she has 27 employees. But can you imagine? This is a woman who was just a researcher, not just, but she worked as a researcher. That's all she did. And she started her research in vulnerability the day that 9/11 happened. And she said, how in alignment was that? And then 8 years later, and everyone's saying to her, you know, this is like an overnight 15-year success, right? And she said, no, I just did this, and I believe that this message had to be out. No different than our spiritual counterparts in this. She started up her own direct-to-customer online educational business, the Courage Works course, which somebody just told me they took, and they loved it. Generated $6 million in revenue and 100,000 customers in its first year. Wow. I love this. I heard Dara saying that when it was in there. I love this. Maybe stories are just data with a soul. Isn't that nice? Our stories are data, because they are they not? We use our, right? We use our data, and what in science of mind, what we want to do is not use our data to predict necessarily our future, but to learn from the feelings that we experience through that, and then make a different choice. Exactly. And so we only use that as our data. Oh, you know, every time I did that, that happened. Now, how did that work for you? It didn't. New experiment. I love this. As Brown learned to be a female on the internet is to become a target for nasty comments. If you're in public and you're a woman, I think for most everyone, but I think women do have a little bit more than that. Put a system in place. I don't care if you make $40,000 a year or $40 million. She advises, hire someone to give you 3 comments that are worth responding to and delete the shit that's not. She loves cussing, by the way. She doesn't use the F word, but she uses every other one. So this was my favorite, and I actually live by this one for a long time. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. She goes on to say, embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy. The experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, very, very much in alignment with science of mind, and all the philosophers of all times have said until we can actually do this and be okay with the discovery. That's what I really get from her. Let's be okay with the discovery. Instead of like, I got to get this down. I got to get this. I'm going to get this. She does? This is my favorite. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. She explains that to every single company that she goes into. They say, we don't want you to talk about vulnerability, but we're having a lot of problems with creativity. So she says, okay, so you want me to come into your company and work with creativity. That means that, and her definition of creativity is making something that has never happened before so that you can have it innovative. There's not a damn way, to quote her, that you can do that without being vulnerable. Because when you bring your idea to somebody, you have it's going to be an opportunity for them to say, that stinks, man. And you have to still get up with that. Spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us. And that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. Practicing spirituality brings a sense of perspective, meaning, and purpose to our lives. And then this is the one that I double live by now. And I would say, being a minister for 6 years and being a co-founder with Rita, this has been really important for me to remember. I don't think I would be as harsh as it's saying it, but why not? Our stories are not meant for everyone. Hearing them is a privilege, and we should always ask ourselves this before we share. How important is that? How important is that? That doesn't mean you're not being vulnerable. It just means be really careful when you start to share who you're sharing with. Doesn't mean you're judging. For me, it doesn't mean I'm judging. It just means it's a privilege to hear my vulnerability. It's a privilege to have my feelings put out on the table for you to see, right? So then, who has earned the right to hear my story? A lot of cheap seats in the arena are filled with people who never venture onto the floor. Oh, yes. They just hurl mean-spirited criticisms and put-downs from a safe distance. For me, if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. So, she's a little, well, because she's been to, now, I mean, can you imagine being that exposed after you're just a researcher doing numbers, and then she walks out into the light and everybody gets to her. So let's just break it down for a second. So tell me just some feedback a little bit. How do you feel about the idea that it's a privilege to hear your story? Anyone?
All right, so this is something. All right, so this is something that I learned back in about 94, 95, somewhere around there.
Doesn't sound like it is.
I was, hello?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
So dude told me that, that I needed to get vulnerable, that I needed to share, like, the real stuff inside. But I needed to be careful who I shared it with, because just like that, that last sentence, if you're not in the arena or have not been in the arena and gotten your butt kicked, I don't need your feedback, your opinion, because you don't have the same experience. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to learn in the beginning just to be careful who I share my story with. It's come to the point now where I'm going to share my story, but you keep your damn opinion to yourself. I don't want to hear it. I don't need to hear it. I'm just sharing my story. If you have a story that you want to share, go ahead and share it. But what I've learned is I don't have to comment on whatever your story is.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have the right to comment on mine unless you have an experience that tallies with mine.
Right. I think too what she's talking about is the idea that it's not about that you don't need to share your story and people need to hear it. I share a lot of stories when I always say, isn't this wonderful what I told you and you didn't even ask me? I mean, I'll share stuff like that. But I think what it's saying too is that we need to honor ourselves on that deepest level of that.
I just was going to make a distinction. I don't know how.
Stick it in just like this.
Oh, is that better? Oh, that's better. Okay, rock star.
Rockstar, that's how I call it, rockstar.
Well, I wanted to make a distinction because I really hear Ron around sharing vulnerably into the collective, because I agree with Ron. If I get God-guided to share one of my experiences into the collective, that's my gift to the collective, and I don't need to know how that lands over there for you because that wasn't the purpose. Right? But I have friends like this one over here where if I'm actually dealing with something and it feels vulnerable, I pick the person that I talk to because I want to talk to someone that I have a track record with, being in a field of acceptance, whether I'm showing up in my genius and my light or if I'm showing up in my vulnerability and my brokenness. I want to talk to someone that can hear me in both.
Perfect.
So
Somebody that's non-judgmental.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it will also be like when Rita and I, I'm just going to use us, when we have sessions and somebody goes to Rita or somebody comes to me, there is there's something that resonates and they'll say, I don't know what it is. I need to come and tell my story and my feelings because whatever that resonate, and they may not resonate to somebody else. But I think also on this one, what it means is that a lot of people will throw out, how could they do that, and why are they doing that, and oh my gosh, and it's not that you're not willing to take in an opinion from someone, but not a criticized, not criticism that says, I don't know why you're doing that but that's not helping. And so I love this because we experience that a lot sometimes. People over in the safe seats going, I'm not going to do that, but I'd like you to do that. Or, or remember when we were on the mainland in one of the centers, she goes, I'm getting tired of not having a bulletin board up here. You guys need a bulletin board. And then we said, well, why don't you go put one up there and be a part of that involvement? And they, well, now I don't want to put it up. I just wanted to, throw out something to the thing. So I'm learning how to balance this, to learn this. People can say something to you and you'll be okay with it. But like I always say to someone, I say to people all the time, I always say, you know what? I just told you something. I'll do this here. I said, and you didn't even ask me, did you? And they'll laugh because they'll think, I shared that, and I don't even know why I did. I mean, it wasn't a bad thing. It was something good. So I also don't want this to be where people are hiding, and I don't think that's her point either. Her point is what? Her point is that if you put it out there, be careful if you, because I used to share it with everyone. What you're talking about, I used to share because I go, that's vulnerability. I'll be vulnerable. And then, but I'm not always ready to be vulnerable. And so you need to, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability isn't showing everybody. I mean, on Sundays, I would say that Rita and I are very vulnerable. And we're very transparent for the most part. And yes, and there's times that I don't have a lot of filters, because it just, pop, it came out. But I'm still very much a knowing that I have to trust all of these people out here with that story because I'm coming here to come from myself for inspiration. So anyway, she's my girl. So Brown's insight actually came to her via a Theodore Roosevelt speech from 1910. There you go.
Such a great book. I think that's my first introduction.
Oh, this one? Yeah. Yeah, we'll get some in the bookstore. Okay, I'm going to read it slowly so we can all take it in. I think this sums up so much. I think this actually really pushed her into a lot of her work. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. And then I got into this, I think we're using too much he. So then I jumped in with, she was quoting him. So it's he, she, who does actually strive to the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself, herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of a high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. And I don't know if I never really heard this actually till her. But what does that say to you? Anything coming out at you? Oh, yeah.
Well, it just kind of reminds me of kind of how I think there is no such thing as a failure, because as long as you tried, then that is success. Maybe the outcome isn't what you thought, but you had the gumption and whatever did to try, that there is really no such thing as a failure. And if you keep repeating it, that's something else. But yeah, to me, there is no such thing as failure per se.
Absolutely.
As long as you tried it.
Right, and it's this one, right, that knows victory, nor you don't know any. So I know somebody who's going to talk about Roosevelt right now. There you go.
You asked us when we came in, what did vulnerability mean to us? This is the definition of vulnerability.
Yeah. And why is that for you?
Because it's talking about the striving, it's talking about spending yourself in a worthy cause, and who at the end knows in the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly.
Right. Yeah, daring greatly, right? I mean, and exactly, very good point. Anyone else?
I like the last part of that phrase. So what it speaks to me is, like, I did sports. There's only certain sports I did. So I've achieved at some and I failed at some. But I never did tennis and I never did golf on a level where I could critique it or have a real judgment opinion about it.
But you played it. I mean,
I messed around with it. However, with basketball or softball, because I have, been in the high achievement, defeat, that resonates with me. Because I wasn't, I wasn't in the arena sitting in the seats. I was in the arena on the floor. I was in the action. So I know what it feels like to have a victory because we played as a team, and I know what it's like to be defeated because we did not play like a team.
Good point.
Yeah. So, I went out with as much enthusiasm, as much as effort, as I had, and came up short, made some errors, But like it says, the credit belongs to the person who is actually, in the deal.
Right.
And so I have that. I've actually been in the deal, and not just with sports, but with life itself.
Sure.
Been in the deal. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another thing, too, is that there is, for me, the hardest thing is when you don't do either of them. The most time that I have been ever tortured in my life is when I wanted to do something, and I just stayed in the middle with nowhere to turn, basically. It always reminds me of purgatory in our Catholic. How we have heaven and we have hell, and then we have that in the middle, and to me, I'm thinking that idea that what we're going to do right now for you, Stephanie, because I love you so much. No, I know you are, but before you go, I'd like to do a treatment. I'd like to do a treatment because this is how we roll here in Rock. So let's just all take a moment for Steph right here in this moment. And remember not only who and what I am that I'm remembering right now, this daring greatly to remember the absolute perfection of who I am in this God-like moment. And as I know this for myself, I know that for each and every person in this room, in that wonderful, wonderful quantum field of energy that is pure potentiality, and it is running through each and every one of us. And I specifically right now speak my word for Steph, for Star, for whatever is going on in this beautiful body temple. What I know is at the very center of it is pure health. And I know that, I call upon it, I allow that to come up and just allow it to heal everything that needs to be healed in this moment, and actually just reveal that perfection that Stephanie is. So I know that as Stephanie moves from this moment to the next moment, gets in the car, drives home, has the wonderful tea, whatever it is in the world of form, I know that Spirit has never deserted Stephanie, because that energy, that pure energy, is now returning to its natural state, which is health. I know it, I claim it, I announce it, and my word will not dare to come back to me void. It will not dare to come back, because it has been spoken on behalf of Star, and knowing that she is healed right here and right now because of who and what Stephanie is in every moment, and that is God. And I will take nothing less and everything more. So I just say thank you. I release it. I let it go, as together we all affirm, and so it is. There you go. There you go. There you go. Where are we? There we are. We're almost, look at this. I actually am going to actually have PowerPoint that actually ends on time, which is, because usually it's like, don't even start with me. Okay. A couple quotes. I'm going to get down to the end. If you own this story, you get to write the ending. That is one of the biggest things we've used in many. If you own, and I do that a lot with the inner child work that I do. If you can own the story, then you get to write the ending. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. Compassionate people ask for what they need. This is so important. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. Wow, what a concept. And look what it starts with. Not people that only think of themselves. Not only people that it's all about them. It's about compassionate people. Ask for what they need. They say no when they need to, and when they say yes, they mean it. They're compassionate because their boundaries keep them out of resentment. I was just thinking that. One mind. Hallelujah. And that is so important. Just think if we lived by that. Everybody would just be, and we'd be in this wonderful vortex, right, of just honesty. She says, I've spent 20 years studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and empathy. And I recently completed a 7-year study on brave leadership. Leadership is not about titles or the corner office. It's about the willingness to step up, put yourself out there, and lean into courage. I love that. The world is desperate for brave leaders. It's time for all of us to step up. We're all leaders, right? The goal of Dare to Lead is to share everything we've learned about taking off the armor and showing up as leaders. In a skills-based and actionable playbook, here are a few of the big ideas that emerged from this research. This is what she's talking about with the armor. Everybody gets, we put on armor. I love her analogy of this. Until we can actually take off the armor that we put on every single morning or when you're going out into the world, not everybody, she's just general speaking. But what I love about what she says is we've had it on for so long that instead of coming home and taking it off, it's easier just to leave it on. And I went, oh yeah, I've been there. You got the armor so strong to protect us from that world out there, right? And she said, when you come home, we can't even take it off anymore because it's so ingrained and embedded of who we are. So vulnerability for me personally is when I can take off that armor and know that it's safe. And for me, the reason I know I'm safe is because of my spirituality, because of who I am. The reason I'm safe, like today, we were in a courtroom situation helping, supporting someone today. And it was beautiful because everybody got very much into the story. Remember, it was a story that, what do you think that means? What do you think that means? That I could feel the armor. Everybody kind of getting into the armor part of it. And I thought, we forgot to do, not in the beginning, but at the end, what we just did with Stephanie, stop. Put on your brakes, man. We got something to do here. Remember, we were talking about this today, stuff. You're sitting there and you're coughing and shame is coming up and oh my God, and our people, what are they thinking? And we just stop. And we say, oh my God, let's remember who we are. Let's take our armor off for a minute. You know, let's get vulnerable. Let's get vulnerable, vulnerable. What is that? Oh, physical. Okay. So anyway, I think that is a key to it of what she talks about, vulnerability.
So is Dare to Lead her newest book? Is that out?
Yes. Yeah. All of her stuff is actually out, and it's so funny because she's cutting down her talking stuff because she doesn't want to be away from her kids and all of that. But can you imagine, she said, I used to do like little events and just speak. And now she sits there and it really is a whole new world for this woman. Can you imagine? This woman was just, I mean, it's not like I sit at home feeling sorry for her. I mean, I'm not going, oh, the poor thing. What's she going to do with all them millions but it goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. We think, I love what she says, if you're making 40,000 or 40 million, we're all in the same boat. It's all subjective at the end of the day. I mean, what she's going through is just, that's why someone will say, well, they'll come and they'll say, yeah, it's not like I'm in a really bad situation like so-and-so or the comparison thing. Comparison too, Brene Brown says, is the killer of joy. Comparison is the killer of joy. When you start comparing, mine isn't as bad as yours, and whatever you're going through, that's your journey. So, back to here. What does it say? Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. So, a few closing thoughts. I actually am on time. I think this is brilliant for me because So here's how I want to end. I want you to give, I introduced you to her. I'm really glad I showed the TED Talk. I think it's the best way to, you can talk about people, but if I've got her live, why not give her to you? But I really urge you to continue. She's all over. You can, Super Soul's on there. But I would like us just to end with like a sentence or two of just what you got out of being introduced to Brene Brown and the evening.
Why me first? Wow, what I took away is I need to step up my game with vulnerability. I, too, am guilty of not taking the armor off when I come home after I leave the job. So, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really great. I've read her books and have seen the TED Talk, and it was just really good reminders. And I really liked seeing the personal side because I didn't really know about her. I've known her work and her books, but to see just her personal side.
Nice.
For me, I found it really affirming because I have been particularly recently just really choosing to be vulnerable in big ways that have left me feeling really uncomfortable or in interactions that are uncomfortable and then going home with a hangover going, is it me? Am I, and it really, like listening to that, it's like, oh no, every time it was from that wholehearted place. So I'm coming out going, okay.
Right.
All right.
Or you're staying in the arena
Right.
Until it's flushed out and not going home. There's nothing worse than how when you go home and then the next day you wake up and it's just like a hangover.
Right.
It's just like you woke up and go, what I do, what I say, but if we can get back into that honesty stuff of really just confronting it, not like in the 70s or 80s when it's like, I'm going to tell you how I feel right now. No, that's just being mean-spirited.
Right.
What I'm talking about is saying, this is what's happening,
Exactly.
opening up and saying, this is how I'm feeling right now. That way you don't take it home and you don't wake up with a hangover. Yeah. What does Buddha Bear think? What do you think, Buddha Bear?
Yeah. Actually, it's kind of funny. Again, things happen for reasons, and I never really even thought about vulnerability and shame much. I'll be honest. It's just emotions I just never dwell on. And when I'm going through personally, I'm really going to be stepping out, and I realize the fear is the vulnerability, and I never even associated that. So just in what I'm planning for myself, it's been a building block that I didn't even expect.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
being honest, yeah.
And being strong. It's
Yeah.
it's a strength.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
that's her whole work has been about reframing it and then allowing, like she said, her biggest goal in life is that we will have a national dialogue about shame. It will save our children. It'll save our marriages. It'll save our work. It will do everything. But we have to have a national, international dialogue about shame. Right?
This presentation tonight made me recall my son, Larry, when he had an accident and became a quadriplegic. And I was so vulnerable. I only wanted to help him. And I kept saying to Larry, honey, teach me the courage that you have. And his answer to me is, Mom, just be you. That's enough for me.
Ooh. Teach me how to be myself. Wow.
A couple of things. Thanks for the introduction, Patrick. I've watched some of her talks and some of her stuff on Facebook, and she's a kick in the pants, and the message is cool. What I'm walking away with is I've got some work to do.
I always had the belief that vulnerability was a weakness. And I think the thing that really hits home for me with her work was the fact that numbing what you feel is not of any advantage.
And also that numbing, you can't numb the part of it without numbing all of it. And we're not even talking about drugs or alcohol. It could just be numbing it by just putting up armor. Yeah. And so how beautiful it is. You can't say, I just want to get rid of that part and not accept the whole part. So, Judy?
Well, this was wonderful. Thank you for this. Yes, vulnerability always has been weakness. I'm taken right back when she was talking about I'm not the only one, to the evening that we had the radical forgiveness. And we had to be vulnerable to step into the circle. And it was all worthwhile because we came out the other end, new people, really. Peace, calm, wonderful. So I have learned that vulnerability is when I know who I am now, I can be vulnerable and strong. Because I know who I am, I know what I believe. So, thank you.
Yeah, isn't that a great thought? It's because we become vulnerable when we're not clear about really who we are. So of course it would be vulnerable because you're walking out not really knowing or wanting to be everything that you want me to be. And so you're really walking out just completely vulnerable and scared. Go ahead.
I just want to say another word that there are still people in my life who test my vulnerability. And I'm still strong.
Exactly. Thanks for reminding me about that forgiveness workshop. God, that takes us back a long ways, doesn't it? Ooh. I know. Did you? Yeah, we did. Umberto.
What I was coming away with was a realization that that shame is really a delusion, being in a state of delusion, not recognizing that I basically, what is there not to love? I'm the totality of all creation, all power. It's like everything that went into making me is inside me. So what is there to? So what I've been dealing with is I had this realization. The only chink in the armor is risk aversion. And when I can recognize what the truth is, then there's no risk. Because it's like, okay, let the whole power of the universe flow through this and do this thing. It isn't some isolated piece of it that's doing that, no separated part. That's a delusion.
And what kind of armor would we need when we have the power of the universe guiding, protecting part of who we are? That's who we're expressing. You're going, what armor would I need? That's all the armor, if you ever needed it, is because of the truth of who we are. Rita?
Was it the last quote about falling and failing? And was that the Roosevelt speech? Which one? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what I got out of tonight, it's interesting. I guess I realize, I've had a life that's been a lot of starts and stops and try and fall and fail and, try this, and I've gotten, like, throughout my life, kind of a reputation with people in my past that, I flipped from one thing to the other, and just criticisms and stuff. And now I realize I'm really grateful for myself that I tried things and I did things and I just followed my heart. And sometimes I fell flat on my face and didn't succeed, but I just kept going. And because I was looking for myself and looking for what I really was, my true self. And I just got that out of tonight, that all those falls and fails and everything and were just part of the whole thing. So I'm grateful for those things. I'm grateful that I did it. And it took me a while to get to where I am today. But I'm sure I got through my stuff.
We were spending the last couple days since Sunday after the meeting. Rita and I are at a time of our life when we're really taking time to say, look what we've done. Not just here, but just in our own lives for the 20 years that we've known one another, and how many times we have fallen and gotten back up and just everything you just said. But what is coming up now is that when we become vulnerable enough to remember how special we are and to really give ourselves the credit, not for succeeding about the success, but it's more about the times that somebody tests my vulnerability and I still can say, wow, and giving ourselves that kind of credit.
We're on the same. That was exactly what came up for me, was to bring in the word authenticity, because I'm finding for me to be vulnerable and authentic means I'm trusting that I'm worthy no matter what the outcome is, whether people like it, dislike it, blame me, idolize, it doesn't matter. It's like it's the authentic love and truth of my being, right? And I'm worthy no matter how the outer world responds.
Well, that's the comfortability that we're talking about in all of her work and all the work in our spirituality. In our spiritual work, I hate the word work, actually, but our discovery, I love the word discovery, that we have to realize, or we can realize, that this is all like unfolding. Like when we have more work to do, it's beautiful because that means more opportunities to remember who I am. I really believe that is the ultimate of what we're really doing, is that we have it all, but we have to remember. And sometimes it's difficult to remember, but the more vulnerable we are, the more and authentic to be able to walk out. And I looked back at a journal that I had from right when we started. Not tonight, but started when I came here, and I said, the only thing before I'd ever leave the island that I ever want is to be fully authentic, fully transparent, and by wanting that, there have been a lot of not authentic moments and a lot of times that have scared me, because you come from where you want people to approve of you or like you or whatever there is. And at the end of the day, for me, that's why I love my inner child work that I do, but I love at the end of the day to go, no matter what happened in our day, I love you, Patrick. I love you. I love your daringness. I love your, but today I really messed up. I know. That's what Brene Brown always says. I love you not because you succeeded. I loved you for what you consider a mistake. It is not. What do they say about guilt? Guilt and shame. I believe it's about making a mistake. The person that says, I made a mistake. So they come in and you go to apologize and you say, if you wanted to ever, if you did something to somebody, wouldn't you apologize? I've apologized very recently. So, and I would go, I apologize. I made a mistake. Is so different than I am a mistake. I'm sorry, I am a mistake. But a lot of people and the work that she's doing are people are walking in saying, I am a mistake. And there's a big difference between that and I'm sorry, I made one. So let us close up. And a wonderful, give yourselves a hand. Give Brene Brown a hand. So now you know. Now you know, when I mention Brene Brown, they're going to go, yeah, we love her too. We like her too. Okay, so let's just take a moment to just, remember our self-actualized God selves right here and right now. And what I know is I take a moment to just take off all the armor. Take it all off. And dare to just bathe in this pure energy that some call God, some call life source. It doesn't matter. As I've said a million times, it needs no name because it is every name. And so I just bathe in this wonderful light, this energy, this thing called love. And I just know that that is who I am. That is my true identity. As I know it for myself, I know it for each and every person in this room. I know this for Stephanie on her way to absolute wellness, from perfect health. I know it for this entire planet. But what I know in this moment is that whatever was needed to be heard was heard. Whatever was needed to be felt, I repeat, whatever needed to be felt has been felt. And I know that we have the opportunity, if we choose, that beautiful thing called choice, that we take that and we use it by choice, by absolute willingness to unveil the perfection that each and every one of us is. So what I know for each and every one of us is that from this moment to the next moment, to the next moment, to the next moment, it is all that beautiful thing called life, spirit, pure energy that has never been touched by anything. And that force is running through all of our affairs. I know it in our finances. I know it in our health, I know it in our wealth, I know it in our relationships, I know it in our creativity, and I know that tonight has been deemed perfect, and everything has unfolded from this place of good. So knowing that, it's simple. Just release it with such gratitude, knowing that there is always more and more and more, and I just bless the demonstration that has occurred tonight, and we just get out of the way and let it be so, as together we all affirm as one. And so it is. Woohoo!